Thank you very much for joining today. As you can see on the screen, the focus of our presentation is diversity, anti-racism and school curricula in religious education. And education generally has been widely recognised in the recent policy literature in Northern Ireland as pivotal to challenging manifestations of racial inequality, including in the current draft race relations framework. Within this, as we outline in this presentation, religious education has a particular role. And one reason for this is that although religion and race or ethnicity are separate protected characteristics, the racialization of religion is well documented. So that occurs when members of a religious tradition are constructed as a single racialized group and have particular cultural or behavioral characteristics ascribed to them, usually negatively. This racialization can lead to discrimination, exclusion, and structural inequality, and religious education is key to challenging this process. Moreover, as different forms of prejudice tend to occur together, challenging religious discrimination also stands to address other forms of prejudice among individuals and communities. And the importance of religious education in this regard has been recognised in recent policy documents, including the consultation on the Race Relations Order in 1997, which came out in 2024, and in the current review of religious education. So in this presentation, to examine the contribution of religious education to racial equality, we draw on evidence from two studies that we have undertaken, James and I, in the past few years. So the first is a study exploring the experiences of education among minority ethnic groups in Northern Ireland, which I undertook with colleagues from Queen's. This was funded by the Nuffield Foundation and was a 2-year study that comprised analysis of policy, curriculum and educational data pertaining to minoritised groups in Northern Ireland, qualitative interviews with 62 children and their parents across the region, and interviews and focus groups with 43 representatives from the education and community sectors. So that was the most significant study done in Northern Ireland to date of the experiences of minoritised groups in the education system. The second study is the Religion and Worldviews Education for All project that James and I undertook last year, and which concluded shortly before, and it's important to recognise this, shortly before the Supreme Court ruling on the JR 87 case, which Nick mentioned. And this was funded by Cullum St Gabriel's Trust, we're grateful to them, and was devised to explore possibilities for an inclusive approach to religious education. It comprised a survey of attitudes to religious education among a representative sample of the Northern Ireland population, which we carried out in conjunction with Lucid Talk. 6 meetings of a dialogue group of 19 members with an interest in religious education, including those from belief backgrounds which have had little opportunity to be represented in curriculum design to date, and a focus group with primary school teachers. So Nick mentioned this, but for those who are unfamiliar with the current syllabus for religious education in Northern Ireland, this is wholly Christian in content at primary level. Reference is made only to awareness of other faiths and respect for other faiths as a manifestation of Christian moral principles. It's from Key Stage 3 that children are introduced to at least 2 other major world religions. As has been mentioned, the largely confessional character of the curriculum came under scrutiny in the judgment from the Supreme Court in November, which stated that the syllabus at primary level doesn't provide information in an objective, critical and pluralistic, there it is again, manner. The syllabus is currently undergoing a review in response to this ruling. So, examining the implications of the syllabus, our collective research has identified 3 challenges to racial equality. First is that the current syllabus positions belief systems and identities other than Christian as less important or valid. The second is that it fails to provide children with knowledge of the beliefs and practices of their non-Christian peers. And third is it offers withdrawal as the only alternative to Christian RE, with often a low educational value, and I'll talk about some of the implications of this now. So the first equality issue is that the focus on Christian teachings and moral principles in the current syllabus establishes Christianity as the norm within the school and society, and thus positions other belief systems as less important. And with no requirement to teach other traditions, research participants reported that minority faiths and beliefs are often marginalised in schools. And this is equally a concern for schools with high and with low levels of religious diversity. So first, it can make the beliefs, practices, and experiences of children from minority faith traditions invisible in the school. Second, and as the quote on the slide acknowledges, the exclusive focus on Christianity can also convey to pupils that other traditions lack relevance or validity. And as the participant stated, it's the misconception, we don't have any ethnic minorities in this school, so it doesn't matter that we only do this. Yes, it does, because you're giving a message to the young people who are in your school. You're devaluing everything else. So for those teachers who wish to acknowledge traditions other than Christianity, the lack of defined space in the curriculum meant that it was often only possible to do this in a fragmentary and superficial way. And this could actually serve to reinforce the otherness of non-Christian beliefs because they weren't treated with the same status or quality as Christian perspectives. Also, in the absence of school-based learning about religious diversity, young people from minority faith backgrounds could themselves be forced to become teachers or ambassadors for their faith. And this is a burden that isn't placed on their majority peers. The second equality issue results from the failure of the current syllabus to develop children's knowledge of non-Christian traditions. And research participants suggested that this impeded children's understanding of and ability to engage with the lives and experiences of their classmates and others in their community. And as this participant acknowledged, the children said, well, everybody celebrates Christmas. And I said, well, actually, they don't. They went, what? What do you mean they don't? You know this is a simple thing that they don't understand. A Muslim child, a Baha'i child, does not celebrate Christmas. There are other holy days that they celebrate. And as we saw in the interview data, particularly in the study on minority ethnic groups, this lack of reciprocal understanding could contribute to a sense of isolation among children from minority faith and belief backgrounds who felt that their experiences were not recognised. Moreover, in the absence of critical and objective teaching about faiths other than Christianity at primary level, there were indications that children were drawing on other less reliable sources to evaluate these traditions, including those perpetuating racist and stereotypical tropes about religious traditions. And this could contribute to the development of negative attitudes among children by the end of primary school, before world religions were introduced at Key Stage 3, and this work has also been recognised in other research that James has done. So the third equality issue is that parents' only option, if they don't wish their children to receive Christian instruction, is currently to withdraw them from religious education. And this is disadvantageous to these families in two ways. So first, parents felt that withdrawal was exclusionary, could appear punitive through a child's removal from class activities, and could contribute to further othering the child. As the extract acknowledges, I don't want her feeling that she's the odd one out. There's enough challenges when you're a kid going to school like that. Where parents opted for withdrawal, our research echoed that of Richardson and colleagues over a decade ago, that alternative provision was often of limited educational value. It typically lacked structure and purpose and was, as the slide states, in some cases literally just colour-in sheets, or could be games or silent reading. And we also found in some cases that withdrawal had not been offered as an option to parents, or that schools had withdrawn children without parents being aware. And in these examples, parents were prevented from exercising agency over their children's religious learning. So I'll hand over to James now to outline approaches to building racial equality through religious education in response to these concerns.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca, for outlining the context and the challenges. I have, in the next 10 minutes, two main things I want to talk about. One is how our findings show ways we can build racial equality through religious education. and the other is how our findings can help us assess the current draft framework for race relations. It's a lot to do in 10 minutes, so I'll try to keep moving. But in terms of the first, how can we use religious education to build racial equality, I want to draw attention to 4 things which I have there, and I'm going to deal with individually. So the first is that religious education that is focused on pro-social aims can have a positive effect. And from our survey, we found that actually this is something that would be welcomed by the wider population in Northern Ireland. As you can see there, 65% are in agreement that religious education should reduce prejudice, 66% that it should create positive relations between people of different religions, and 60% improve recognition of minority religious groups. And the question is, how can religious education do that? Well, respondents understood this could be achieved through developing respect and respectful debate about beliefs, learning to understand a range of different religious beliefs and also non-religious worldviews. And specifically, respondents were asked about this in relation to the primary school. So that's what these results refer to. But secondly, we go further and say that a second aspect that RE can help to contribute to racial equality is through adopting an anti-racist approach. An anti-racist approach we draw on Dermot Sparks' work involves seeing difference, recognizing inequality, and taking active steps to address bias. And you can see here some of the examples of ways in which people agreed or suggested that we can, through religious education, both see difference, recognize inequality, and begin to take active steps. One relates to inclusion of history in religious education that expose negative aspects of religious involvement in colonialism, conflict, and abuses of power. And it's only when we understand those that we can begin to address it. And similarly, like some of the data that Rebecca mentioned, there is a sense of qualitatively different approaches, or a difference in esteem given to different religions, flagged by this second quotation, that can be addressed and need to be addressed through religious education. And our research found that if a curriculum is reformed in this way, parents feel that their children from minority faith backgrounds don't need, and non-religious backgrounds don't need to be withdrawn from religious education. And next I want to say something about a person-centred religious education, and this was strongly advocated for by a number of people within the dialogue group. And that refers, first of all, to making sure we have wide representation of different backgrounds at a global and local level in the religious education syllabus, which presently is very limited in terms of these sort of examples. You can see here, if learning about peace and social justice, some examples. All are women of faith. All have campaigned for peace and social justice. All are Nobel Prize winners, and I would hazard a guess that all are largely unknown to learners in our schools in Northern Ireland. But it's not just about bringing forward global examples of diversity for young people, but also local ones. And you can see here from this comment from one of our contributors that it's really important that a curriculum is formed by real life experience, and it's brought to life by those communities themselves, so that all children are aware that being Sikh isn't something that only happens in India, but we have Sikh people in our country, our society, and our culture. So again, it's important to recognise difference within our own society. Another aspect of this, though, is that if we are including examples of people from our own society, it's not just about representation. It's about actually including people from this wider minority ethnic groups to participate in the writing of a syllabus and in the creation of resources as well. And you can see here on the right-hand side, someone has said that that you could, put some people in a room and say, go and write a resource or a syllabus even, but it won't be authentic unless there are people from a diverse range actually participating in the creation of that resource. And at the moment in Northern Ireland, the Department for Education has given the review to a drafting group with no expectation or requirement that there be representatives from minority, religious or ethnic backgrounds on the drafting group. And it's worth pointing to the review of the race relations strategy that was conducted by Zaza just in 2024. And he pointed out that this is a gap in Northern Ireland, that we needed to have meaningful engagement of people with lived experience. And I think we can see here that in this case, that isn't happening. But it's not too late. It could still happen. And the fourth area that people identified in our research for improvement was the support of teachers. And it was a key request that teachers be helped in their knowledge and in their understanding of a variety of issues, which they then would be able to pass on to pupils. And that was the view of some of the dialogue group, but also of the teachers themselves, who wanted to develop their own knowledge and also their positions on teaching religious education. Now, the second thing that I said I wanted to I just realized I've got that picture there. I should recognize that in some cases, in the integrated sector, efforts have been made with this kind of resource, the bias busting, which is anti-bias training for teachers. And certainly that was something that we feel, based on our findings, would be valuable being extended further. So the final thing I said I would talk about, and that is how do our findings relate to the current framework, draft framework for race relations in Northern Ireland? And it's a rather busy slide, but in the left-hand column, I've taken out what are 4 statements which relate to education in relation to the interventions that are suggested in the strategy. And you can see in the first 2 some general statements about how education can contribute. But I think our research suggests that these could be strengthened. And indeed, I'd look to Wales and Scotland for an example of how that is done. Wales stands apart in its explicit political commitment to be an anti-racist nation by 2030, and they say that education is a core mechanism of that. Local authorities must ensure the religious values education curricula align with the Anti-Racist Wales Action Plan, including engagement with Black, Asian and minority ethnic histories, racialised religious identities and challenges to stereotypes and harmful norms. Similarly, in Scotland, their anti-racism in education programme calls for addressing colonial histories, recognising systemic racism and amplifying marginalised perspectives. And these apply across the whole curriculum, including the religious and moral education curriculum as well. You'll see that anti-racism training is included as an intervention, a suggested intervention in the 3rd box down. However, it's for people who work in public services. We don't know if that will apply to teachers, but we do know that schools are exempt from equality legislation currently, and therefore it would be really important that teachers are added to this. And lastly, in the final box, we have enhanced capacity building to strengthen grassroots leadership. In a sense, this is a bit of a response to the Zaza review, including minorities in capacity building, but really it's rather weak. And unless this language is strengthened, it will allow communities to continue to be ignored or not consulted, even on issues that directly relate to how they are represented, and in our case, in religious education. And I would just reiterate, it's not too late to address this in the current RE review process, but it needs to be prioritised in coming weeks. So those are all our comments, and thank you.